Welcome to Just Three Workplace Gurus, a podcast around the real world of work. My name is Mike.
I'm Amy. And I'm Vivian.
And today, Amy, Vivian, and I are joined by Timothy Davis, who is a colleague and friend of mine, to talk about his experiences in the evolving elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Timothy has worked in the DEI space for a number of years and has experienced its ups and downs. Welcome, Timothy.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
So tell us a little bit about you and your work experiences and how you got into the diversity space in the first place.
Sure, happy to. So I guess I would say for the better part of the last maybe 15 years or so, I've worked in diversity, equity, inclusion, employee engagement, and learning and development. And it's just a space that I'm very passionate about, people outcomes, like making our team members better, stronger, faster, so they can show up and be their whole selves. And if we can enable them to do that, they better drive company outcomes. But I would also say that it's also kind of hinged in my own journey, like my own series of wins and losses, things that have gone extremely well, things that have gone terribly for me, and wanting then to take that and share that with others, provide them with those insights, and particularly with leaders, because I think leaders are the crux of all of this, particularly with leaders, and enable them to better support and guide and stand up and challenge and do all of those things that help our team members feel better in the workplace and do all these wonderful things that most of them really want to do to provide success for our companies.
That's great.
When you got into this about 15 years ago? I'm
Yeah.
curious what you were doing prior that sort of segued you into this space.
No, it's a great question. So I was actually in banking, and some of the work that I did was in banking, but I was in branch banking. So I was actually sitting in a what we call a financial center. I worked at Wachovia, I worked at First Union, and we call them financial centers. And so I was selling products to checking accounts and savings accounts and CDs and all of that glorious stuff. And I had a manager who thought I did a really good job of training and developing and coaching my team members as well as customers. And it was she who was like, maybe you should think about moving into training in some other spaces. Or maybe she just thought I was terrible at sales. I don't know. But that became exactly
I doubt that, Timothy. I think you're probably a great salesman.
So that was sort of the pivot,
pivot.
your manager,
Yes.
and then thinking, how can you bring your gifts and whatnot, and like you said, things from your journey
Yes.
into this
Yes.
space. Very cool. Well, I
Yes.
feel like this is a little bit of a hot topic these days. Um, yeah, I don't know if you want to help define or redefine
Sure.
DEI, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around that. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, I'm happy to share. Mike asked for, what are some things that you want to talk about, and I think there are three things that come to mind. So I'll share them, and then we could dig in, we can impact, we can do whatever you think is best. But I would start with probably the foundational question, Vivian, is when I find myself in these conversations with colleagues and friends and others. The question is DEI dead? I hear that often. Is DEI dead? And I don't know if it's dead. It certainly feels that way sometimes. I hope that it's not. But what I will say is that it's without a doubt being stress tested. I think we can all agree on that.
Mm.
But here's the other thing that I would say is that lots of organizations adopted the language, but they didn't adopt the infrastructure. And so
Mm,
when winds blow, like a strong wind blows, so political or economic or reputational, when these strong winds blow, of course, it crumbles. But the truth of the matter is this: if DEI crumbles under stress, then it was never embedded in the first place. It was always symbolic. Because what
very
I
good
see
point.
is, yeah, DEI survives only when it's owned, when it's measured, when it's operationalized, when it's in the DNA of an organization. Now, let's be honest, that isn't an easy thing to do. You have to be very intentional, but that's when it really survives. Otherwise, it's always symbolic. It may be good intentioned, but good
Right.
intentions are not enough. So
Or it's
that would
on
be the first
paper.
thing that I would say.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. The second thing
Interesting.
that I
But
would,
yeah, go ahead.
after you. Oh, well, the second thing I would say is this, is that from the DEI perspective, we have spent a lot of time trying to build awareness, which I think is very important. But the other truth is this, that awareness was never the outcome. It was just the entry point. Because here's what we know, that awareness doesn't mean capability. If you are a learning and development professional and you're watching this podcast, then what you know is that providing more information to team members doesn't create greater skills. If you are an engagement leader watching this podcast, what you know is that just because a company has values doesn't mean that people behave differently, right? Like awareness and capabilities aren't the same thing. If you're in marketing or in sales, you know that just because you have insights doesn't mean that you have execution. And so it's very similar in DEI. Like we created awareness, but we haven't always created capability.
Hmm.
So you have teams again. So now we go back to the sort of kind of like infrastructure. You have organizations who know that we really want to do a better job of ensuring that our team members look like the customers that we serve. But if we don't know how to make really good hiring decisions, then how do we get there? Like if we don't have the capability, or we have managers who say, yes, I want to elevate and lift up, and I want to make sure that all of my team members are reaching their goals. But if I don't know how to have difficult feedback conversations with individuals who look differently from me, then I can't do that. I can't enable that. And so really it's about how do we move from just awareness to building capability if DEI is going to truly survive.
Which goes back to the first thing you said, which is if it's not symbolic and it really gets embedded into operations, into action, if you will, practice, it's going to crumble because it
Yeah,
wasn't there. So this all ties
absolutely.
in. All right. And
Yeah,
then your third
absolutely.
thing,
And my third thing is this. My third thing is this. One of the most damaging narratives that I think that is really done an injustice with DEI is that merit and DEI are in conflict.
mm,
Right.
So, merit assumes that the best person gets the job. Now, listen, anybody who's ever had a bad boss knows that the best person doesn't always get the job. Now, we already know that, but let's work with that assumption. Merit assumes that the best person for the job would then get it. But the truth of the matter is, we also know that merit tends to reward familiarity, proximity, coincidence. It tends to, right? DEI, all the DEI does is it questions who is showing up. That's all. Because we want the exact same things. We want the best person getting the job. There is not a different assessment for people that are different. There is not a different assessment for people that are different. DEI says, like, who created this bar? Who created this bar? And then who has the ladder to reach the bar? Because we all don't. But if we do that, if we can be more inclusive about who gets to show up, then we can better ensure that the meritocracy is actually taking place. The DI definitely being stress tested at these moments. The importance of moving to capabilities, I can't stress that more. And then understanding that merit and DEI are not opposed whatsoever. Those are three things that would make a huge difference as we try to push through this very murky, uncomfortable, even sometimes very discouraging times.
very good. Yeah. Go ahead.
Third, the third point that you made to me is probably the biggest challenge because I don't think we are all hearing the right language around what diversity, equity, and inclusion can mean. And you taught me something about this 2 or 3 years ago. I think early on in our tenure together, we talked about it. And I had this sort of perspective as pardon the expression, old white guy, that it didn't really apply to me. And you said to me, uh, are there times when you don't feel that you're a part of a group or that you feel left out? Tell me about those. we just have such great, profound conversations. It's very cool. And that was a huge lesson to me that that is possible. It is possible for any of us to not feel like we belong, to not feel like we are part of something. And I found that really interesting. And you and I had a number of conversations about that kind of thing over the years. I think that's the message that we're missing is think about a time when you don't feel like you belong. That's what we're talking about. So I don't think the messaging has been very good because it just simply
Can
feels like it's about race or ethnicity or religion or whatever. And that isn't the point. The point is, are we bringing everybody to the table equally and acknowledging that instead of always inviting our friends? If you're trying to make
Right,
hires,
absolutely.
invite all your friends, invite people who think like you and sound like you and look like you because that makes you feel comfortable does not mean that you're getting the best quality.
Absolutely.
can we take a step back for all of us and all of our viewers and listeners? I'd love, Timothy, for you to just define your definition of DEI, because I think that is such a, we're talking about a lot of things and there are, nuances, and then there's definitely things that are misunderstood or wrong things
Sure.
equated. But just if you can give a very simple, what is DEI? I mean, I know it's diversity, equity, inclusion, but
Sure.
what is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So
Mm,
I think I would define each word in that, right, for clarity, because they're all very nuanced, right?
yeah.
So diversity is just about difference, right? Like it's what whatever set of differences we have, even if we talk about the folks on this call, right? There are two males, there are two females, there's one African American. Like we can define it's just the variety of the set that you have in front of that's all diversity is, right? And I think what we forget is that there are lots of ways we can be different, right? So diversity always exists. It almost always exists. If this was a call with four African Americans on it, there would still be some diversity there, right? So it always exists. Equity, equity is just about ensuring that everybody gets what they need to be successful. Because the truth of the matter is, we often need something very different, right? So equity is about let's make sure that everybody gets what they need so that they can be successful as they move forward. And inclusion is making sure that all of us, can show up and be the best person that we can be, right? And the funny thing is, I think those are outcomes that most people want fundamentally. Like we recognize that people should be able to be themselves, that they should be able to be their best self at work, that they should feel included. Like we understand all of this intellectually, but perhaps maybe to Mike's point, I think sometimes we get lost in some of the other statements about it, and I've said before, sometimes what should be just humanity, maybe what should be social, sometimes takes some kind of a political nuance, and then we become very distracted from what the true goals of diversity, equity, inclusion, and many, many other things that are going on today.
I heard a politician a while ago say, when asked this question, how would you feel about working in a place where uniformity, inequity, and exclusion are the rule? Just to put it in a different
That's
context.
awesome, right? And would you
I
want
thought
to
it was
show up to
brilliant.
work? No. Right, right, right.
I thought it was brilliant. And we probably need to say that more often, I think.
There's a component also, well, comfortable, we use that word, but safety, emotional safety, physical safety, social safety. I've been on both ends of the spectrum, right? I've been the majority. I've been the minority. I was bused into an African American neighborhood for primary school because I was in one of the first schools that got desegregated, right? And half of the neighborhood's parents wouldn't let the kids play with me because my mother was fighting for inclusion, equity, diversity. And that was like it was a scary thing, right? I had an what was she? The aunt of my ex husband in Texas take her hand in my hand and say, I can't tell you how happy we are that Ricky married himself a little Jew girl. I was like, oh, she meant it badly.
Uh,
I actually don't. I also saw her on a beach cover her eyes and say the terrible N word to a woman who was on the beach. And then an hour later was holding hands with all sorts of people with different races and African Americans in her prayer group. And I was like, what is going on here? Anyhow, so I think there's a lot of confusion in people's minds, just who are we comfortable with? And then they bring their psychological baggage to the workplace, and it doesn't help this. Or maybe it does help this. Maybe this is that opportunity to
Yeah,
go, wait a
yeah,
minute, we are the same. No, we're different. That's great. Like, learn from, anyway. So it's a
Different is
very,
good.
very complex and important, I think, one of the most important things. Each workplace is a mini society, a mini community, right? And those elements have to work. So anyway, that's just the thoughts that popped into my head.
I feel like I
yeah.
told this story recently, and I can't remember when. It may have been when all of us were prepping for this podcast, but years ago, I was working at a tech company where a woman who was the VP of a large engineering team explained to me that she was very concerned about diversity. And I assumed it was because she was talking about the fact that she was the only woman in a team of maybe 100 men. And I said that to her, and she said, "Oh God, no, it's because we're all Indian." And I had never thought about the fact that the culture that they were a part of was the challenge, men versus, there are many
There's so
ways
many
to
layers, right?
analyze diversity.
Right.
Yeah.
This
Timothy,
is why I like the DEI programs coming into the workplace and just into our social circles because there's so much education out there and awareness um, and verbiage. What's the correct verbiage? It's evolved over the time, Vivian, that you were meeting this aunt in Texas. We've all learned how to speak differently, how to be more respectful and aware. I mean, Timothy, I would love to hear from you just what that looks like now in companies. How do we educate people a little bit more? I feel like right now on the political side, right, we're very divisive with one another. And so it heightens feelings in many other ways. And so how do we help people within our own organizations in terms of the empathy
Mm.
towards one another?
Yeah, yeah. So I may end up talking out of both sides of my mouth, Amy, when I say this, because I think both all parties bear some responsibility and has some ownership in this. So I think from an organizational perspective, right, there are certain things that certainly an organization can do that helps support and educate team members. Like employee resource groups are a great way to support and educate team members. Unconscious bias is a great way to support and educate team members. In some of the assessments that I've done, we do this really interesting, what do you call it, an activity where we ask people to write down their five closest friends or the five people that they take advice from, the five people that they invite over for dinner, like these types of things. To have them think about, what does my circle look like? Like who do I take advice from? Who do I go to church with? Who do I invite to my parties? And most people begin to see, well, these people look like me, right? But the truth of the matter is, eh, also, people should take responsibility for their own learning.
Mm.
Like, part of the journey of, diversity, equity, inclusion is understanding how we show up ourselves. Like, how am I navigating the world? What am I doing to contribute? How am I helping? How are my own biases showing up? And so, while we can ask, and we should ask people who may identify as LGBTQ or brown or black or women, we should absolutely listen and understand and hear their experiences. It's also our responsibility to do the work ourselves and say, how can I educate myself? Because oftentimes those tales have been told and have not been heard. So it's a little bit of both. Like, organizations should, from the top down, be providing opportunities, right, and helping educate. And then if we really value this work individually, right, we should also make sure that we are taking the time to educate ourselves. It's a great question.
well, and on that same line, I do think, I mean, I'm speaking for myself. Often I'm a little hesitant to dive in because I don't know what your life experience has been. And so I don't want to overstep. I don't want to insult. I don't want, as Amy said, use the wrong words or, whatever that is. So I think there's also a fear of putting yourself out there and making a mistake in developing relationships.
And that's fair. That is absolutely fair. The truth of the matter is, though, we're all on this journey. Nobody owns all the knowledge of this. Like, we're all still working out together. And what I would tell you is that is a very fair statement to say, I have a question. I'm not quite sure how to ask this. It may get awkward. I don't want to land poorly. When those questions come from a very sincere place,
Mm,
people hear that and they want to
yeah.
engage. And I think that fear risk dividing us and keeping us apart and keeps us and hinders the learning. So I would say absolutely. I have that same fear sometimes when I say to friends, like, I want to ask something, right? But it's worth stepping into that uncertainty, um, and experiencing that growth for sure.
It reminds me that go ahead, Viv. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think there's also an exposure issue, right? Amy, Mike, you're San Francisco Bay Area. Huge amount of diversity. Even though when I moved to San Francisco from New York, I was shocked at how segregated San Francisco is. That was shocking to me. And then I moved over to Oakland. I was like, okay, that's more like it. Because that's what I'm used to. That's what I grew up with. I go into a subway car and the entire universe is in there, right? Every language, all different clothing and skin color. It's beautiful to me, right? That's what I'm exposed to. But somebody else who is maybe not in an urban environment and they're either suburban, rural, whatever, and they don't have exposure, that's an interesting thing to tackle too, because there's a tendency, some get excited to discover what they don't know, and others fear it because it's unknown.
Yeah,
So I just
it is
wonder how
unknown. You're
that's
right.
navigated too. And if that's part of this winds blowing against diversity or just, the stress
Yeah,
test we're talking about. So
yeah,
I don't know how that factors in too, because not everybody's
yeah,
coming from a metropolitan area, right?
yeah, yeah. No, it's very true. You're right. Those exposure points, I think sometimes are filled in by things like media quite a bit, right? One of the things that we talked about, and I actually looked this up before this call. There are approximately, I think, like 40, 50 million African Americans, blacks, people who identify black in the US. But only 16 states have more than a million, right? And I think those 16 states have about and I think where did I get this stat, right? Because people want to know where you get stats from. I think it was like blackdemographics.com or something like
Right.
that. Just in case anybody spot checks me, right? Fact checks me. And I think the number was something like 33, 34 million of these folks live in 16 states, right?
Amazing.
Which means the vast majority of states don't have a lot of people who identify as black, right? Which, to
That's
your
right
point,
to his
Vivian,
point.
is you have lots of states where it is very possible that you're not really encountering people who look like me very often. And so in those situations, it becomes easier to believe a narrative, right? To turn on the news because it's interesting that just people of color, black and brown, are shown committing crime right on the news, and so if that's what you see, it becomes easy. It becomes your reality, right?
Yeah.
And
There
it's
is
not
Yeah.
factual.
something,
That's the
yeah. There's
narrative
something
you're
called
fed. Right.
well, absolutely. There's something called common sense racism. Common sense racism. Of course, we don't go to that side of the town, that town of town. It's not safe. It's not because of the people that live there. It's just not safe. It becomes common sense, right? That's people frame it like, oh, I don't do that because oh yeah, no, of course we don't do that. So they don't think they're being racist by avoiding a neighborhood. They think it makes common sense.
Yeah.
And those common sense judgments are supported by the narratives that they hear about people, right? So you're absolutely right. It becomes more difficult when you don't have the opportunity. And that's just not, and that's with anything. So, we've made that briefly about race, but it's with anything.
Anything.
When we don't interact with it, right? We develop our narrative about it by what we see, what we hear other people say. It's as simple as that, right? But those data points are often wrong. And in our present society, when there's so much coming at us, there's so we when we are so overwhelmed with information, it can be very difficult, right, to really figure out what is accurate and what's not accurate, what is true and what's not
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
So I take it back to Michael. It becomes even more important to ask really deep and thought-provoking questions and challenge your beliefs.
I think that's true, and I liked your answer about exposure, like, even media exposes you. You know, my daughter had a very interesting experience. She did AmeriCorps when she was in college. I don't know if you know what that is. It's like a very
Yes, that's great.
structured, not quite militaristic, it's not military at all. Think Peace Corps, but AmeriCorps. It's often a program that people do in college. I don't think it's exclusive to college, and then you wind up getting some remuneration for your college degree, but it's like, I think a year long or so. Anyway, she went to school outside of Baltimore and she was in a program working with inner city youths doing like a cleanup project. And my daughter they used to joke and call her Casper, blonde, white skin, green eyes, you know. And it was largely African American teenagers. And they looked at her and they were like, "Why do we have to listen to you, Whitey?" And she was like, "Oh boy." And she said, "You don't." She said, "But this park is pretty dirty and I'd like to clean it up." And she then went on to be a social worker. So like but she navigated that so gracefully because she didn't she heard what they said. She goes, I think she even said, "I hear you," but we got a job to do. Who's in?
Right,
By the end of
right.
that day, everybody was tight, high fiving, best friends, hugging. By the end of that year, I think she's still in touch with someone. So,
Yeah, very
that was an interesting, just like lack of exposure. Exposure. Oh, okay, there's no threat here. Let's move on.
yeah,
Interesting.
absolutely.
So, training, exposure, I guess, education, self reflection.
Right.
So, back to your question, is DEI?
It's struggling. I mean, really, it's struggling right now. Like, I think there are clearly some organizations who have stuck with it. They've dug in their heels. They see its value, and there are other organizations, some organizations that we really looked up to, and who have tucked tail and turned. So it's in a very difficult space. But the truth of the matter is that it's needed, right? People, we will always have this sense of diversity, right? Um, um, the fairness of life is that it's unfair. It's terribly unfair. So we do need equity. People do need equitable solutions, and decisions are made better when they are inclusive. So we need it. So what I would say is, uh, what we need to do is figure out how do we push through and develop its capability so that it is stronger and remains resilient and people remain engaged in the workforce. Yeah.
I'll shush you in
No,
a second. But in our prep call, I remember sharing a story that at a conference, there was a panel on DEI in today's climate. And one company, prominent company, said, "Oh, we definitely have DEI. We just rebranded it." So I hope that, I mean, nobody should have to do that, but that under the stress test, that it's like, all right, we're just finding workarounds because the core value is still there and the core need is still there. So we're just going about this a little bit differently. So I don't know, dead, reworked, or whatever, or people are just sort of kowtowing and saying, "I'm afraid. I'm taking it off my paper." But are they still,
Yeah.
which is not a good thing either. Anyway, just
What's a
Well,
form of rebranding it? What would they call it, or what does that mean?
think
I've heard
in the policies, they just, I don't know. I don't know the details, but the impression I got was they were just sort of rerouting it.
Yeah, Amy, what I've heard other organizations do is call it things like inclusion and belonging, trust and belonging. They've used some other verbiage as opposed to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Interesting.
So, and listen, and I think that the renaming can be useful. I think what would be even more useful, and this sounds like what these organizations are really doing is how do we put it in the pillars of how we move? I mean, wouldn't the world be a better place if we didn't have to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion? It was just so
yes,
embedded into how
Yes.
yeah,
organizations work. They didn't have to call it anything. We call it how we do business. That's what we call
Yeah.
it, how we work. I mean, that's really right. It would be nice to be able to throw all these words out the window. So when I hear that, Vivian, that organizations have rebranded, uh, What I wanna believe they're saying is what we've done is we've renamed it because we realize that that verbiage doesn't really land well on some people, but more importantly, what we're doing is we have built this into our internal processes. This is not an initiative. This is how we do business at XYZ, and because of that, people feel better coming and working at our organization because we know the value. Tangible
So,
value,
yeah.
financial value, emotional value of it all.
So can you talk a little bit more about I like what you were saying about, DEI as symbolic versus the capability, the awareness versus capability, and sort of getting it into the operational side. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what did that look like for a company?
Yeah, I think there are many ways that you can operationalize this diversity, equity, inclusion, and depending upon where you are along this kind of growth cycle. And let me be clear, when I say operationalize diversity, equity, inclusion, I'm talking about making sure that things are fair for everybody. That's they're paid fairly,
Yes.
they are reviewed fairly, they're promoted fairly, they have equal opportunity. That's what I'm talking about. The things that should be going on
Right.
at any rate, like that's what I'm
They're
talking about. And
hired
so that
fairly, right.
it's hired fairly, right? And that's kind of where it starts, Vivian. Like, what does our talent management process look like, right? Or like, how are we hiring people? What type of interview questions are we asking? Who are we putting on hiring panels? I mean, it starts there, but it's also how are we paying, right? Like, Amy and Mike have applied for the same role with the same amount of experience, but Mike gets paid $40,000 more than Amy does.
Mm,
Or
yeah.
somebody says in the back, "Well, Mike's the head of a household. Like, yeah, I mean, he's got 3 kids. Let's give him an extra 20," right? Like, how do we make sure those conversations are happening? Like, it's all of that stuff, right?
Right.
Figuring that out and having really thoughtful conversations about how, again, we built systems and processes, right? So, and that we're constantly checking ourselves, that we are holding ourselves accountable. That's kind of the operation, but how are we holding ourselves accountable? Who's owning and how are we holding ourselves accountable to making sure that we're executing? Yeah.
What are the challenges that you've had in the recent past when you are trying to promote the program? In other
You know,
words, I mean, I'm just curious what kinds of pushback you have heard that may be helpful to all of us to sort of hear what other
sure.
people who don't understand may be thinking. I mean, I think we've talked about some of that, but I'm curious in the workplace what you've heard.
Yeah. Listen, I'll be honest, Mike, in my experience, it can be very difficult for leaders to pivot from things that feel good to things that challenge.
Mm,
And so that's when we talk about doing things symbolically and doing things that really make a difference. I'll give you a great example. Let's talk about employee resource groups. Employee resource groups can be a wonderful way to, one, help team members navigate the organization. Like team members, they join, they're able to commune with individuals that look like them. Team members who want to learn can join these organizations. They can provide feedback to leadership. Like they can be like this really, really wonderful resource and an easy lift for the organization. So lots of organizations go with that. They're like, let's put together employee resource groups. But employee resource groups rarely help define equitable outcomes during the talent management process, right?
mm,
They don't
right.
change that. Employee
Right.
resource groups don't ensure that when we sit around and we are having a conversation around who we're going to promote and who is the best talent. Employee resources groups don't inform that. That's where you have to have more difficult conversation with leaders about what questions are you asking. And I noticed that you have 20 people, right, who interviewed, and you only had one woman on the panel and one woman interview. This like getting down into the nitty-gritty of why we do what we do and pushing back against leaders, that that's a more difficult thing to do. Becomes a harder thing to do, right? And so, executing, doesn't always feel good. The outcomes are good, like the work is good, the work is important, but it can feel very uncomfortable to have to challenge people, and for or ask people to sit with their decisions and why they chose the person that they chose and why they didn't choose and why and why um Vivian was described as being very aggressive on her annual review and Mike was described as being a go-getter, right? When
Interesting.
you
Yeah,
ask,
it
yeah, when you
shows
ask
up.
people, yeah, those things show up, right? And so you're asking people to sit with these things that maybe they've never sat with. It makes them feel uncomfortable. Those things are difficult to do, right? And then as an organization, get the whole organization moving in a particular direction. And so because of that, too often we defer to things that symbolically look nice, right? So we put up pictures of diverse people, right? Images, and we celebrate Juneteenth or we celebrate International Women's Day. And we do the nice things, right? But we never get into the the nuts and bolts that really make uh make the engine work.
Might be
I
safer
think you're
to
right, and I think
say
there's I
we
think there
uh,
sorry.
do the easy things, not the hard things first.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
I have to tell you, I had an experience. So my company does ergonomics health and wellness, right? We have a online platform that we license out to companies, and it's, self-help for training and self-assessments and how to feel better at the workplace. Anyway, we were setting up a company's site, and their diversity, equity, inclusion team came to do a review of the site, which I had never been asked to do before. And I was like, awesome. And I thought I did a pretty good job representing. And they took it to the next level. You have thin people. Why do you have only thin people? I'm like, oh, you literally, why don't you have anybody with like head covering? They just made me realize culturally it was narrow. I thought it was diverse. I was like, look at me. And I felt embarrassed. And that felt, I mean, I was appreciative and we changed it, and it was an eye opening experience. But I also think some of that pushback is someone's own feeling of embarrassment, shame, uh, you
Absolutely.
know, and I'm sure that plays into it too, because,
Absolute. Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
I left that meeting with kind of my tail between my legs, and we fixed it and it got way better because of it. You know what I mean? But I was just like things I didn't even think about. They were all
And
over it.
well, and it's an interesting
And
tension
ageism
because
too. Everybody's young and
well
pretty in your things. I'm like,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. But it's an
Anyway,
interesting
all of it.
well, and it's an interesting tension because it's not intended to make people feel bad, and I think
No.
that's kind of what happens. Like, people think, "I am going to be disciplined, I'm gonna be made to feel bad, to look bad, I'm gonna be made to feel guilty." That's not the intention whatsoever. This intention is to educate. That
Yeah,
really is. It's to educate. But that education can feel kinda sticky, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Well,
to get to, I'm
I'll
sorry.
say that it made me, it has made me think over the last couple of years, going back to the original conversation, how I hire and, how did I get to that point? And Timothy and I know the last hire that I made. Sometimes you just meet someone and you know they're the right person,
Mhm.
but I'm still questioning in my head, did I do the right thing? Did I talk to the right people? Was the interview team diverse enough? We made the best choice, and I this person knows this. I've often said I think it was one of the best hires I've ever made. I still am questioning the quality of the process that we went through to get to that. Anyway, I think it's going to take a long time. And I think
For
with every
sure.
person, it's an education of one kind or another. Like it's really what you do, Timothy, is tough. Really, it is. I mean, I've seen you speak, and I know how passionate you are about it. But it's tough what you do. I don't think I could do it. It's tough work.
I appreciate that, Mike. It's you're right. Like, this is not overnight. I mean, clearly it's not overnight stuff, right? This is one step forward and two step back. That's what it feels like often,
Right.
constantly in the midst of the battle. But I also think it's sometimes we do talk to somebody and we're like, I absolutely think this is the right person. I don't think there's anything wrong with that feeling. I think we also have to do the other pieces to make sure then that
Yes.
the interview process was fair and equitable, to double check that that there weren't
Yes.
other biases throwing up for me, but it was absolutely the right person. But sometimes we do know for sure.
This sort of brings us to the third thing, which is the whole merit question. When you said that merit does not equal DEI, could you just
Yeah.
go into that a little bit more? And
Yeah,
'cause that's nuanced too.
yeah. Yeah, no, yo, I'm happy to. Um, meritocracy, as we all know it assumes that the best person should get the job, right? That's all. Like the person who works the hardest, who produces the most widgets, right? The most sales, like the best person should get the job. And that sounds lovely on paper, right? I mean, I think we all agree. Like the truth of the matter is, think about this. When I go and apply for a job, and I am applying for jobs, when I go apply for a job, I'm hoping that I'm going to be the best person for the role, right?
Hmm.
But the truth of the matter is, it doesn't always work that way. Like, because to Mike's point, sometimes people meet somebody and think, this is the right person. And they never check to make sure that there are any biases in that decision, right? And so the higher we go up on the corporate ladder, so every time we go up from manager to senior manager to director to senior director above and above, it filters out. It becomes less diverse. You see less women, less people of color, less all of these things, right? So one must, are we then saying the reverse of that, that there's only a certain group that are strongest, best, smartest for these roles? I don't think that we think that. So DEI, again, is just saying, here, let's make sure that we find a diverse set of candidates who are qualified for the role. Let's allow them to interview. Let's put them in front of you,
Yeah.
allow them to interview. And then we can make sure. Because listen, if the only people I ever interview for a role are the people that go to my church, or the people who play a sport on a sports team with me, or the people that live in my neighborhood, I don't know that I'm getting the best candidate. I might be
Mm,
getting the best candidate of the people in front of me, but
Yeah,
I don't
right,
know that I'm getting the best candidate, right?
right.
And what I
right.
want to do is I want to get the best candidate. So let's expand and find ways that we can make sure that the best candidates are sitting in front of us. And then we really would have merit. Then we really would be like, oh, yeah, I've done a wonderful search. I've gotten this cross section of individuals who all have the talent and skill. Now I'm going to ask really thoughtful questions, questions that are unbiased, really thoughtful questions to make sure that the best person is sitting beside me to drive my company. And I think if you're a business leader, that's absolutely what you should be trying to do. Get the best person for the role to help you drive your organization, get better results.
I probably think that's where a lot of this struggles the most because there are people, like you said, there's an inherent bias that you're not even aware of.
Yeah.
I put an ad out on Indeed, and the whoever responds. How are
Yeah.
there, you know, things to do to expand the pool, right?
Right.
Geographically and whatever the criteria is. That's really an interesting thing. And I even caught myself last night. I was talking to a friend, and she said something about somebody contacting the CEO of something. And when I was writing back, I almost wrote, "Oh, do you think you'll hear from him?" And I stopped myself, and I was like, "You don't
Mm.
know if it's a him." And I wrote, "The CEO." And then the next text was, "Yes, she will be getting back to me tomorrow." And I was like,
Oh,
"Huh, interesting." Like, so, some of these things are so, like, wired into our psyches that we're not even aware of it. I mean, yeah, interesting.
Yeah. I'm sure you've heard that, we talk about it because AI is all kind of the rage now, that if you ask AI to spew out a picture of a doctor, it's probably going to be male. A nurse is probably going to be female. I mean,
I didn't know
because
that.
obviously it's been fed humans. We have fed it information, and it from time to time reflects the bias of the information that's going on, right? And so, CEO and he makes. I mean, think about this. Think about this, Vivian. If you walked into an office, right, and it was all if it was all white, you would not ask what was going on. But if you walk into an office and it was all Latinos, you would wonder what was going on. You walk into an office, it was all blacks, you'd be like, what's happening? You would pause. Why do we do that? Why would we do that? If we think that everybody belongs and everybody should be there, why do we pause at some groups and we don't pause at others, right? And so we have been wired without realizing to decide who belongs and who doesn't belong. Who
I
should
think
be
you're right.
showing up? Yeah. Who
And
should show up and who, yeah.
I think you said something earlier too about we tend to hire people that are like us or asking those questions, who are my in my closest circle or whatever. And I had two experiences walking into a company where I remember looking around like, huh, they're all very beautiful plus size women in here. The predominant, makeup of this organization. And I looked at the person who was like in charge of hiring, and I was like, oh, I don't even know if it was conscious. I went into another organization that was a fitness organization. They sell a fitness product. And I was like, I'm not worthy of being here. Everybody was like, I was walking into, the gym, Equinox or whatever. And I was like, I wonder if that's conscious or not. Or like, hey, we're a fitness company. You got to, fit the profile. I don't know, but
You got to look the
it's
part.
rampant. It's really rampant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So where do you think we're going? Do we just weather this? What do you say to the DEI world and leaders?
I think absolutely.
I'm gonna put it more succinctly, Timothy. Do you have hope?
I do
Do
have
we have
hope.
hope?
I do absolutely. I absolutely do have hope. I do have hope. There are millions and millions of people who are very passionate about this, who want better outcomes, who totally believe that it's really important that people be included, right? That we look we look better, we support each other better. So I absolutely have hope. I also realize that hope is not a plan, right? Hope is not a
Mhm.
plan. So we still have to think, plan, be intentional, be strategic, work together, right? There's work ahead of us, right? And we may feel stressed for quite some time, but I absolutely believe that there's hope. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been
Thank
Thank
an
you.
you.
awesome conversation.
Great
I think we could have done another
conversation.
Appreciate it.
2
Yes.
hours.
And thank you
Timothy,
for
thanks so
inviting me. It's been
much.
a pleasure.
Thank you,
And
Timothy.
thanks
Thank
to
you.
our listeners and viewers for joining us. We'll talk again soon.
Take care.
Bye bye.